When babies survive the abortion procedures intended to end their lives, it is met with a steely and cold silence from the abortion industry. But today we are joined by Melissa Ohden, who, as an unborn baby, survived the abortion procedure which intended to kill her. Melissa not only survived, she thrived. So, Melissa, thank you for joining us here on Uplift today. And I'm just so grateful that you've joined us. Can you just share with us how you arrived into the world as an unborn baby?
Yeah, so I think like many survivors, my story has not been linear. I didn't get to find out the entirety of my story and say, digest this and then move on and hopefully use it for good. My story kind of came in pieces. So I'm adopted. Not every abortion survivor is an adoptee. What I find in my work at the Abortion Survivors Network is more survivors are actually raised in their biological family than adopted, which, makes sense, right? When we know that the child is not the problem. It's the circumstances that woman is going through or that the family is experiencing. But I am one of those abortion survivors who was also placed for adoption. And so I now know my birth mother, like far too many women, was not given any other choice than abortion. She was actually forced to have the abortion that was meant to end my life. So she was 19. She was a college student. She wasn't married to my biological father. And her family forced her to undergo a saline infusion abortion. And, I think it's really interesting for people to understand, no matter where they are in the world, abortionists aren't performing adequate exams on women to know how far along they are gestationally, especially when we see chemical abortion pills being pushed so predominantly right now. And they're, telling women, you don't need to see a medical professional for this. Well, what that means is that women's lives are in danger and they don't know how far along they are. And so that was a lot like what happened to my birth mom. My medical records state my abortionist thought she was about 18 to 20 weeks. But when I survived that abortion and was accidentally born alive, I weighed almost 3 pounds. And so in one of my medical records, another doctor remarked I was probably 31 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, shocking. At what point during your life was it revealed to you that you were an abortion survivor?
Every survivor finds out their story at a different age, but I actually found out when I was 14. So, that ages me really quickly. It's been over 30 years since I found out my story. And, the reality is that day changed my life forever. We live in a world that wants to say that people like me don't exist. But when they deny our existence, they deny the pain that we go through, including finding out our stories.
And how can you describe you were left for days there, were you, as a baby waiting?
Minutes, yeah. So, again, I think it's really interesting because we don't track a lot of data. We don't hear a lot of stories about survivors. One of the things that I actually love about the UK is you not only report out statistics, but you also tend to find more survival stories in the media, which is fascinating to me. I don't know what the difference is culturally. And maybe it was Roe versus Wade that stood until just recently. I don't know. I think time is going to tell, but it's really interesting to me. But I tend to find a lot of survivor stories covered in the media in the UK. And in them, you'll read some really interesting circumstances like, babies surviving for minutes, or, in some reports, we'll read about how babies who survive abortions survive for hours or days before they ultimately pass away because they're not provided medical care. But in my circumstances, I soaked in a toxic salt solution for 5 days. Being poisoned and scalded, and I should have been delivered dead in the final step of the abortion procedure. But when they induced my birth mom's labor, I was accidentally born alive. And like far too many children, wasn't immediately provided medical care, was laid aside That's what my adoptive parents had been told. And now we know that after a period of time, it looks like a matter of probably 5 minutes when you look at my medical records. I was ultimately rushed off to the neonatal intensive care unit because the abortion took place at a hospital. And so I made it to the NICU because a nurse was unwilling to just leave me to die like she was told to do.
Wow. Well done to that nurse. And then following from that, you went on to found the Abortion Survivors Network, which is an incredible organisation to help abortion survivors heal. What was the pivotal moment that led you to start up the Abortion Survivors Network?
Yeah, I started sharing my story in about 2007. And I think, like most survivors, really felt like I must have been the only one. I mean, I knew of one other survivor. I found out about Gianna Jessen when I was about 19. And that changed my life to know that there was even one other person who was like me. And I think that's one of the most difficult parts for me about living in a culture that has been so impacted by abortion. By and large, they bury these stories. And so survivors think they must be the only one, and they're broken and they're lonely and isolated and marginalized. And women who have failed abortions don't talk about it because they don't hear any other women whose abortions failed talk about it. And so it was kind of this process. After I started sharing my story, I found lots of people would share their story with me. And I kept thinking, gosh, somebody should do something to help people who survived abortions, because I had to go through my own process, get a master's degree in social work, really had to, I think, heal myself. And survivors and families are looking for that. And so about 2019, I finally took a look around and went, yeah, nobody else could do this except for me. And at that time, we had really aggressive abortion legislation sweeping the United States. And a lot of survivors and families were really upset by it, thinking, well, this is horrible, right? Why is New York celebrating aborting babies up until the point of birth when we're over here living with this day to day, knowing how awful it is? And so that's how we became a nonprofit about 3 years ago. And, at this point, we serve survivors from, I think, 22 different countries. So we have survivors from the UK who are regularly involved in virtual groups. We just had a retreat where we had 25 abortion survivors who are all adults. One came in from as far away as the Netherlands. Our youngest survivors are babies right now who survive both chemical abortion pills. That's typically what we see happening with our youngest. And our other survivors are in their 90s, but we know that people have survived various attempts to abort them for decades.
Wow, it's surreal. And when the abortion survivors are informed about how they enter the world, what emotions occur and what can a healing process look like for them?
Yeah, it is different from survivor to survivor. Every once in a while, a survivor will say, wow, you know what, when I found out my story, I knew there was such a purpose and a plan for me. And, that's somewhat true for most of us. We have this little piece of us that goes, wow, right? There must be like something really powerful for me. But at the same time, there is so much rejection. So we're born into rejection, no matter who it was that was responsible for that abortion taking place. For those survivors who are raised in their biological family, if that family isn't supported and healed, there tends to be a lot of emotional abuse, neglect, physical abuse. They're projecting their own pain and guilt on that survivor, but survivors hear that from a young age. Why couldn't you just die like you were supposed to? Nobody wanted you. So there is a lot of rejection, a lot of isolation, thinking that they're the only one. There's a lot of PTSD-like symptoms. So we have a lot of stress in our bodies. Our birth moms went through stress, right, when they were facing an unplanned or crisis pregnancy. And then survivors go through the stress of whatever abortion attempt it was that forever changes our chemical makeup. I love when people will say, oh, Melissa, you can't remember what happened to you. Well, that's true. I mean, I'm grateful. But I can tell you that my body knows what it feels like to be poisoned and scalded and to fight for my life, because I suffer with that every single day. So survivors have a lot of immunodeficiency issues. So our bodies just react to stress in very complicated ways. We have some survivors who are missing limbs or have deformed hands or other deformities. Some folks have been in the hospital most of their lives. It looks different from person to person, but by and large, we are a population of people who deserve to know that they're not alone and be healed and know that they can have a voice if they want to.
That's so true, so important that you can have a voice. And so what, can you share what it was like reconnecting with your own birth mother? Please.
Yeah, I think people are really interested in survivors' lives, right? I mean, no matter what people believe about abortion, they kind of just go, so wait a minute. I mean, how does that happen? And do you know your birth mom? And what is that like? And for me, it's been a really long and winding road to my birth mom, but a beautiful one in the grand scheme of things. So, found out my survival story, parts of it when I was 14, was really angry. I'm going to be really honest. I was angry about surviving an abortion, angry that somebody tried to take my life. Had to go through this process of forgiving my birth mom, not knowing all of her story. And really almost 20 years later, I ended up starting to communicate with her. So started looking for her when I was about 19, but I didn't find her till I was 30. And even then, her family just made it clear that they were not going to pass along my messages to her. And so back in 2013, one of her family members did reach out to me, and that's how I learned that the abortion was forced. That was news to my adoptive family. That's how I found out my grandmother was responsible for forcing it and telling the nurses to leave me to die. And I also found out that my birth mother didn't know for over 30 years that I had actually survived that abortion. She had been told that the abortion was successful. She didn't know if I was a little boy or a little girl. I was placed for adoption without my birth mom's consent. And so, as you can imagine, this journey has been very long for her and I to connect. But we started to communicate not long after that family member reached out, and we now get together as often as we can. We live maybe 40 minutes away from each other in the same metropolitan city. I didn't know that when we moved here about that time. And, my birth mother, Ruth, is just a courageous woman. I am grateful for her sharing her story. Knowing that she loves me and she supports the work that I do, that gives me such incredible strength. And my kids know their grandmother, and I'm just so grateful that they get to have her in their lives as well.
Yeah, exactly, because she lives so near to you as well, which is ironic. And so the concept of abortion survival makes pro-abortion activists uncomfortable. So often abortion is out of sight, out of mind, and the victims are not seen. What reaction do pro-abortion people have when they hear you share your story and see you face to face, with an intended victim of abortion who is very much alive? What is their response?
Yeah, it is really interesting. I've seen things change a lot over the years in terms of how, the abortion industry or lobby or abortion supporters react to abortion survivors. Years ago, it was pretty egregious the way that they would come after us and say, right, you must be lying. This doesn't happen. You wanted to be famous. I mean, it's pretty awful, the things that they have said over the years about survivors. But then it became, kind of remarks like, oh, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, but it doesn't mean that you should speak up or speak out. And, this doesn't involve you. You don't get to have a seat at this table. And so it's essentially, right, they went from kind of attacking us outright to then being really dismissive, saying, oh, well, gee, I guess I have to say that that's too bad that happened to you, but no, be quiet. You don't get to stand up. You don't get to speak out. And I can't think of any other victim of anything in our world that people would say, you don't get to speak up about what happened to you. You don't get to speak out on behalf of other victims of it, right? Especially victims who are killed and left voiceless. And so that's kind of where things have been, is we went from outright attacks to dismissiveness. And And now what I've seen happen is, because we're raising all these abortion survivors up through the Abortion Survivors Network, and they're all over the place, being healed and learning how to share their story and participate in interviews, I'm starting to see culture shift a little bit, which is obviously what we want to see happen, that people are starting to listen to who survivors are. But you're right, we are an outright attack on the ideology of what abortion is. And so, I think we're always going to face some of that backlash of people wanting us to be dismissed or simply remain silent.
Yeah, and still today, so many abortion advocates, well, here in the UK anyway, despite acknowledging the humanity of an unborn baby, flippantly claim that it is wrong to bring an unwanted child into the world, and that abortion is a clear solution. How would you respond to someone who says that?
Especially when they hear some of our survivor stories, some of these survivors have had incredible trauma throughout their lives because of their family being unhealed. And so I know, when people hear those stories, you're right, they tend to say, oh, well, they would have been better off dead. That's a really easy thing to say when it's not your life that is in danger. And the reality is, abortion or ending the life of another human being should never be the solution to any societal problem, whether it's difficult life circumstances, disability, any of those things. So it is never compassionate. It is never the answer. And I would love to see those folks really stand up and do something in our world for people who are facing difficult circumstances. Instead of pushing abortion as a solution, how about they step forward and do something to help people in their community who need assistance?
Exactly. You've mentioned in your work before that it is hard to embrace your purpose when you are in the midst of great pain, and so many people cannot embrace their purpose. What gets you through the emotional and maybe physical aspect of being an abortion survivor?
I think people can relate to that, no matter what their experience is, that everybody wants purpose and everybody experiences pain, right? We don't get to decide what our lives will look like. And I think that is part of that tension that we see in the world. People want to somehow avoid suffering, or they think they can avoid it for other people. So I think what gets me through it is knowing and hearing from people every single day who are impacted by my willingness to keep doing what I'm doing. I mean, there are days where I think, already this morning I was thinking, oh, this, that, and the other thing. And the easy thing to do would be to try to walk away. I mean, easy, but yet not easy, right? Because I would never find peace. I would never have joy. And so, I think that would be my encouragement to people is, just one foot in front of the other. Take it one step at a time. Keep saying yes and doing that one thing that that you're supposed to do, and not be afraid of it, not be ashamed of it. And at the same time, do the hard work to heal yourself. I could not do what I do if I hadn't first done the work that I needed to do to heal myself.
Yeah, such a valid point. And Melissa, then finally, a mere few weeks ago, Roe versus Wade was overturned, which was a monumental day for the unborn. Following that, the overturning of Roe versus Wade, what do you believe as pro-lifers is the most important thing that we can do to build a culture of life, and perhaps what changes would you like to see in place?
Yeah, it is. It was a time of great celebration with Roe versus Wade falling. I was so hopeful, but yet completely unprepared for the fact that it happened. I mean, no matter where you were in the world, it was just absolutely historic. So much has changed, but yet at the same time, it hasn't, in the respect that, I have every hope that by Roe versus Wade falling, no matter where you are in the world, people understand that there is not a right to abortion anywhere. It is not a right. The UN should not be pushing this. The US Supreme Court never should have pushed this. Provinces and states should not be somehow declaring that there is a right to abortion. Right to life is the foundational right. So, my hope is that some of that shifts, even in your corner of the world, that what happened here changes things for you. But I think what we have to keep doing is educating people about the humanity of every child, about the need to support women in their time of need, that we need to have changes in policy that are supportive of women and families, right? That's what building a culture of life looks like, is supporting people, not ending lives and causing destruction. And I think the other thing we have to do is continue to heal from how people have been impacted by abortion. In the United States, we had well over 63 million abortions in 50 years, and that changes people. It changes families. You can see politically how it's affected our nation. And so people, again, need to do the hard work to heal themselves, to be in a better place to help other people.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Melissa, for sharing your story. It's one of courage and strength as well, and gives people hope here in the UK. So yeah, thank you for joining me in studio, and I hope you have a peaceful, I know it's morning time over there, so hope the rest of your day goes well. So yeah, thank you for joining me in studio today.
Well, and thank you for all that you do.
No worries. Thank you for joining us today on Uplift. Tune in again next week where we'll have more influential guests.